Welcome to the new units analysis and should you pull for the Doorway to Destiny banner, which is basically FE4. It's pretty cool they're adding new units. We talked about our impressions of this yesterday, but I'm going to look into more detail about the units themselves and some comparisons with units we already have in the summoning pool, and it should give you a bigger picture on whether you should be pulling or not. At the end, I'll give you some mathematics if you are prepared to pull here. And yeah, I'll just kind of give my thoughts on the units themselves. Now, the units themselves are unique in pretty much all of them are unique in some way or another because Quan and Lewyn has a preference weapon, but I'm going to give some pretty comparable units you can use that don't require you to spend orbs, and you likely already have them in your barracks. Again, I'm looking at this all objectively, so again, don't get offended if your unit is being compared to Oscar, in this case Quan, okay? I think Quan is a cool dude. I'll probably like him a lot more when I play FE4, but I have to look at this objectively and give you guys some good information to make some good decisions going forward, okay? So, let's start. First of all, we have Quan here and Oscar. Quan is a Blue Lance Cavalier, which is in a very saturated pool, one of the most saturated in the game. And he has that Gaybolg weapon, and he has quite offensive defensive stat spread. So he has one of the highest attacks for Blue Lance Cav in the game, tied with Legendary Ephraim, but he also has good defense. His stat spread is actually very similar to Legendary Ephraim. Now, between him and Legendary Ephraim, it's pretty obvious you should use Ephraim because of the doubling and the fire blessings, but I'm going to compare him more to free-to-play options or just units that don't require you to pull for a legendary hero in case you don't have Legendary Ephraim. One thing that makes Quan very unique is the fact that he gets 5 extra attack and 5 extra defense whenever he's fighting everything that isn't a flyer. So you can look at his stat spread here, 42 defense, 42 attack, and 36 defense before even adding the weapons. 16 might puts him at a very respectable like 58 attack without any merges or IVs. One of the beauty of comparing these units to a free-to-play unit is that the free-to-play units, you likely have a workable IV, whereas if you spend hundreds of orbs for Quan or one of these new units, you could end up getting bad IVs, and that's why I like to look at units that are far more readily available. Also, when you look at the actual builds on the left side, you can pretty much copy the build onto Quan if you want to do something similar, or in this case, whatever unit's in the middle. So, you know, I've had people say before, oh, it's not fair, you're comparing someone who has no build with someone who has a build. You can pretty much use the same build onto the unit that's being, one of the new units being compared. In the case of Quan himself, though, we're going to talk about why Oscar can do something a little bit different than what Quan can do. Okay, so what I have on the left side is Oscar running a pretty standard Fury Desperation. Instead of using an actual Slaying Lance or something, I decided to give him a Silver Lance so the defense are fine to kind of make him as similar as I could to Quan. You'll see that his defense reaches a respectable 35. His HP is 1 point higher, and his attack and defense will actually be quite similar. He's actually going to have 1 attack and 1 defense less than Quan, but more resistance, 5 extra actual resistance. Of course, if you gave Quan Fury and you gave him attack defense too, he's going to outperform Oscar a little bit, and that's just due to the nature of the fact that he has extra stats, higher BST. Silver Lance itself is just something to consider. I don't think I would ever use Silver Lance on a unit myself, but you know, if you want to make him as bulky as possible and hard hitting as possible, which is what Quan accomplishes through his Gaybolg, Silver Lance is actually the weapon to use there. Now, one advantage, of course, that Oscar has over Quan is the fact that he has 37 speed at base. So you can actually just buff him with a Hone Speed, a Hone Cav, or ally support or something, and he can actually double, unlike what Quan can do. With Quan, you're going to want to rely on stuff like quick riposte on enemy phasing. In fact, he has that steady posture ability, so he's kind of like a little bit better on enemy phase, I would say. However, he's not as fast as Oscar, and that's the difference you have here. While Quan may be a little bit more bulkier and maybe hit a little bit harder, he doesn't have the dual phase that this Oscar build on the left can have. You can actually use him in both enemy phase and player phase. So Quan isn't that special. From what I can see, he's just very tanky, and you know, there's already Blue Lance Cavs in the pool that can do this, and in this case Oscar, who you can pretty much just use feathers and, you know, add some merges or even 4-star plus 10, and he's going to totally outperform Quan just with the extra stats he gets. This is just one example of build you can do, but again, very budget, very cheap, and, you know, you can do it. Moving on, we have Silvia and Olivia being compared together. So Silvia, unlike Olivia, is more res, like more resistance and faster, 3 points faster, and has a lot more resistance than Olivia. But you can patch that up without having to go into this whole barrier blade shenanigans or, you know, Olivia, most people should have it 4-star plus 10. Or even if you wanted to, you can add 5-star copies of merges, and they become pretty much identical in terms of stats because the answer BST hasn't been improved. So what you have here is basically an Olivia with higher base resistance and a little bit faster. It's pretty similar, actually. What if you wanted to do, though, because Olivia does have great mix bulk, you can actually make her into a kind of like a combat dancer, one of the better ones to do this, just by giving her just Fury and Flashing Blade, and hopefully you have some sort of speed buff on your team. But even if you don't, 36 speed is usually enough depending on what matchups you fight against. Think of like green armor units, Hector for instance, Grima, Myrrh. These are all slow units, and Flashing Blade still gets its value out of 36 speed. So again, you can do the same thing with Silvia, but the barrier blade that she comes with is only enemy phase, so it's not as useful in the player phase, which is why I've chosen like Wodao and Iceberg there. Wodao, Iceberg, Flashing Blade pretty much gets a solid 28 extra damage out of the Olivia on the left side on player phase. If you can double the unit, it's great damage there. She pretty much relies on that to do damage. Of course, Wings of Mercy is a staple on a dancer unit. I would recommend it on Silvia as well. So yeah, Silvia is not so impressive. The fact that she's in the red permanent pool and might likely be a candidate for demotion is definitely not a reason to be pulling, and the only reason you should be going for Silvia would be just for like waifu reasons if you really like the character. So yeah, if you're gonna like talk about art or something, I'm sure most people would say Silvia's art looks cuter because Olivia's art is kind of like more archaic, but that's not what we're looking at. And Silvia definitely could be a very, very strong resistance wall, and I don't want to dismiss that. I think if you use barrier blade, maybe use like close defense or warding breath or something, you know, all these kind of combinations, you could put her res all the way up to like 50 res and just totally crush all dragons with Silvia. And that's probably one thing that Olivia can't do, but again, both of them can do something similar to this, and it's just they're too similar to make one stand out over the other, and definitely not worth spending like hundreds of orbs for Silvia in that case, especially with that demotion likely coming up. Okay. Moving on. All right. So out of the bunch so far, I think Lewyn is actually the most unique one for sure. There has not been such an offensive green infantry mage in a long time. You know, it's funny because I'm comparing it to a day one unit. So you have pretty much Soren and Nino as the most offensive green mages, but Soren's kind of more enemy phase now because he's got that old owl tome effect. And Nino's is pretty much as close as you get. And you can just look at the Nino build on the left side, and it's pretty much like what most people run. It's because it's similar in concept. I mean, they're both going to be doing the same thing. So Lewyn's doesn't have to rely on getting into desperation range. He doubles right away with his tome, and his speed is stupendous. It's 40 base speed without IVs. Hopefully you don't get something like a minus attack or minus speed Lewyn if you ever did get him, but that's the risk, right? And if you already have a Nino built up, honestly speaking, your Nino is going to do kind of the same role that Lewyn does, which is crush like blue and other green units. In fact, Nino with proper buff utilization is going to crush reds as well. Now, the difference between Lewyn and Nino, of course, is that Lewyn does not rely on a team comp. He should be able to crush things without relying on, you know, hone attacks or rallies or tactics buffs. But relatively speaking, Nino actually would hit harder than Lewyn because of the ground blade effect. So Lewyn is very powerful, upfront damage, doesn't rely on getting into desperation range, just easy to fit into a team comp, and that's what makes him different than the other green mages for sure. I mean, Soren could also fit into most team comps because of the chill attack and brand effect, but again, you still kind of want some synergy between the team to utilize his Wynn's brand effect. But yeah, Nino, already if you have a team comp built with it, it's not really like worth getting a Lewyn, and like what do you do with that, right? It's just, he's just nice to fit into most teams, but if you already have a Nino, just you can crush your enemies with is basically what Nino's always done, right? So especially since most people have merges on Nino already, or if you're 4-star plus 10, she's gonna be kicking some real butt. Yeah. So the same build kind of goes over there onto Lewyn. Some changes you would make, though obviously you don't use like the blade tome. I would still use a flashing blade, but I would use something else like glimmer or moonbow instead. Most likely moonbow to actually cut through defenses for his harder matchups. But he's got that spiral thing as well, so you could actually keep that and use something different like Astra or Dragon Fang with Flashing Blade, which is just ridiculous because after combat you pretty much have Astra and Dragon Fang every single time. With some infantry pulse setups, you can do some crazy things with Lewyn, and he's definitely going to do that. Like, he doesn't need as much team support as Nino does, and that's what makes him unique. Out of the 3 units on this pool, definitely by far the coolest one. But again, because he's in the permanent pool, because Nino already exists, he's not necessarily worth your orbs, even if he's green. We'll get into the orb mathematics now, but yeah, comparatively speaking, you have already Ishtar, you already have Lilina in red and blue, so it's nice to see a unit that doesn't really rely on Blade Tome to do that kind of damage the way those other two did with 4 Blaze and Mjolnir, and that's what Lewyn stands out for. But when we're talking green offensive infantry mage, Nino can do the job. All right, and our free Tempest Trials unit. So she comes with a speed defense bond, fear. I guess that's pretty much the most noticeable things. Physic plus as well. Yeah, I mean, it's nice to just get a free healer, I would say. I'm really going to appreciate getting like a free 5-star healer, and that's what I'll really enjoy out of Ethan. But because she's limited by merges, because her stat spread doesn't really stand out in any way that other units couldn't already do, she doesn't really have much going for her, and it's literally better to invest in a 3 or 4-star healer instead. So you could pretty much use like Priscilla, Clarine, Nana, and they're all going to do the job just fine without relying on Ethan. Of course, if you have Veronica, Veronica's just strictly better, and even probably at base merges, Veronica just straight up beats Ethan in every single way. So yeah, this is pretty much your free waifu 5-star healer if you didn't already have it. But if you want to invest in a healer, I've given kind of like a sample build on what you should use on the left side. And of course, on the left side, you could pretty much use on Ethan herself. What the build on the left side is meant to accomplish, because it might look a little weird on first impression, is to just be somebody who tanks hits either, like to be annoying and tank hits on the enemy phase and player phase. So you pretty much got fear to lower the attack, and then you're likely in front of another unit tanking the hit, so you utilize speed defense bond, close defense, and you got that 33 defense on enemy phase, and they'll likely just soak a hit while protecting other units. So Clarion already comes with fear and martyr, so she kind of does this well, lower the attack, lower their speed through threatened speed, wings mercy, and to protect somebody. That's pretty much it, right? So yeah, that's kind of how I would utilize both Ethan and Clarion. I think Ethan does have more defense than Clarion, but don't forget that Clarion can run a plus defense IV that you probably already had, and the attack stat is not so relevant. That's why I would use the dazzling refinement. And yeah, kind of like a supportive healer build. I'm just thankful that we get her for free, and she's nothing really too special. Okay, and finally, what do I think about pulling on this banner? We have a 3-person focus banner, blue, green, and red. Generally speaking, if you've watched any of my other Should You Pull videos, you'll know that I tell you guys right away, permanent banners, not worth pulling for, because they'll show up on legendary banners or on just they might pity rate break you because they're in the permanent pool. Like, you're gonna end up pulling maybe on seasonal banners in the future, and you'll just be like getting these units anyways just by chance. It could happen, it may not happen, but it's just something to consider, because that would be wasted orbs in that case, especially for low spenders and just free-to-play players in general. For those of you that don't know, green is the easiest to snipe for when it comes to heroes, for focus heroes. Red is the hardest, and blue is in between. Green, the reason it's the easiest is because there's the least amount of units in that pool. Red has the most. So basically, if you're targeting Silvia, there is a very low chance that you'll get her. You'll be spending way too many orbs, the average being at 138 orbs. With those of you that are really unlucky, 1 in 10 people have to spend 306 orbs, as you can see by the 90th percentile there. Also in green, even though the average orbs is quite, I'd say, not so much, 90th percentile, 241 orbs, 1 in 10 people still spend that much, and 109 being your average means that, don't forget that we get about 300 to 400 orbs per month. So you're really ready to spend about a third or a quarter of your allowance of orbs per month just for these units that you may end up seeing them in the future. Like, we can guarantee that these units, minus probably Silvia, will end up on a legendary banner in the future. So consider green, for instance, like in the future, maybe legendary Hector might share with Lewyn. Wouldn't you rather be pulling on a legendary banner that had legendary Hector and Lewyn for distant counter, and maybe Lewyn would give you odd attack wave or spiral strike? Just waiting a couple of months up until like December, the patience could really reward you for not spending your orbs here. Again, for blue, you could end up with Quan, legendary Lucina and such, whatever new legendary heroes we get. And, that's the kind of logic I apply to most of the summoning, is later, just a couple of patience, you'll end up seeing these units then rather than now. I wouldn't say there's any big events coming up, but maybe we would be having a new Halloween banner. We might have book 3 coming soon. That would be a big update then. So maybe just saving a bit of your orbs for that opportunity might be it. Or maybe if you have some goals or merge projects to work towards, you can definitely consider just saving it, waiting at least until near the end of the banner if you were really uncertain as to what to do. So hopefully this helped you out a bit, guys. I want to keep it brief and simple because these units are, just to summarize, not that different than what we already have. That's why I showed off stuff like Oscar and Nino and Olivia, because we already kind of have these units already in the permanent pool, and you already likely have this. So you can work with what you have, and if you're just trying to get that sort of unit to fill your niche, just, farm some feathers, farm some events and contents, get your feathers, and just upgrade those units and invest into them instead if you felt like that was missing from your team compositions, okay? Let me know in the comments below if you have some creative builds for these units or what you might be looking forward to getting forward to in the future. Maybe you'll utilize Spiral Strike in some way. Tell me what you want to combine that with, and I definitely look forward to hearing your thoughts. If you like the educational content, give it one of these. Thanks for watching, guys. See you guys in the next video. Peace.